And I'm sure you're going to have a great afternoon here as well. As most of you know, Andrew Burston's my name. I'm the Executive Director of Research Strategy here. We've had really a wonderful week so far, and I think it's just going to continue to get better as well. Just as I commence, I want to pay my respects to the Kaurna people and note that we're meeting on Kaurna lands today and recognise the traditional owners of the lands that we meet on and traditional owners of any other lands of people in the audience today as well. We've been very fortunate that, well, I was very fortunate to hear Jenny Barber speak earlier this year, and it was a great presentation, Jenny. I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was something that we'd like to hear more of from you. And so Jenny has been very kind and agreed to come across to Adelaide and came here yesterday, attended some of the sessions yesterday, so we're very grateful for that as well. I think they were really, we presented ourselves well at the same time, so the speakers were excellent as well. So Jenny is the editor of the Medical Journal of Australia, so that's, you know, editor-in-chief of MJA. That's pretty important. You know, that's a big thing. It's important to publish in our local areas. It's important to publish in the right places, I think. You know, I think when you're choosing somewhere to publish, it's not just the journal, but the right place to publish to get to the right audience as well. So please join with me as I hand over to Jenny, and love to hear what you've got to tell us.
Great, thank you, Andrew. And is that all good? Sound? Excellent, right. Thank you, it's great to be here. Lovely to have an excuse to come back to Adelaide, so thank you for the invitation. So yes, I'm gonna talk to you about kind of what we do at the Journal, and what I'm really keen to hear from all of you, though, is your questions. I have to say, it is actually terrifying standing in front of a group of academics and medics, because usually I go up to somebody and I enthuse about their work, and then they sort of, their face drops and they say, oh, well, you rejected our paper last week. So if I did that to you, I apologise. We can have another conversation. Just before I start, I'd like to get a sense of who's in the room. So tell me, who's published in the MJA? Great, thank you. Who reviews for the MJA? Thank you even more. Who's written a paper? Okay, and who's kind of thinking about writing their first paper, maybe? Great, all right, well, I hope there's something in it for all of you. Just start my thing. All right, so, can I make this go? Can I make this go? I can't make it go. All right, we can make it go. So I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land and the land that I live in. I live in beautiful Meanjin, which is on the lands of the Turrbal and Yagra people. We have staff across this entire continent, so I'm really grateful and privileged to work with a number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. And I understand that as a journal, we have a lot of work to do in reconciliation, and that's something that we take very seriously at the MJA. And I'll tell you the story about this picture in a little while. But before, I just want to tell you how I got here. I'm a lapsed haematologist, quite a long lapsed haematologist, and I did a PhD at the Institute of Medical Medicine in Oxford a long time ago. So I've got a background in medicine and science. I ended up in publishing completely by accident, like all the best well-planned careers. It sort of happened at a kind of very odd moment in my life, so happy to talk to anybody about that over a glass of wine, and realised it was what I absolutely loved. I absolutely love the diversity of what you get to do at a journal. I can still remember some of the first papers I read at the at the Lancet, and then I was lucky enough a couple of years later when open access was starting and PLOS Medicine was kicking off, and well, actually, PLOS Biology was the first journal in that suite, and I actually rang them up and I said, oh, I don't suppose you're thinking about starting a medical journal, are you? And they said, well, actually, we are. So this is, you know, lesson number 2 for anyone in the audience is like, you know, never assume you can't ask for things. And so I ended up as one of the 3 editors that started PLOS Medicine, which was a completely wild ride. I moved to Australia about 12 years ago at this time of year. So, you know, this time of year in Brisbane, of course, is absolutely glorious. So there was no way I was coming back from the UK after that. I've worked in open access policy, so I combine the passion of open access publishing, and I'm really passionate about national medical journals. I was lucky enough to get the job at the MJ almost 3 years ago now. I felt like I couldn't possibly have done it until I became Australian. So despite the accent, I am Australian. So I thought I was allowed to do it. And I really understand and value the importance of national medical journals. And I think they have a really unique place to play in the publishing landscape. So these are all the things I care about: medical journals, research integrity. I'm very passionate about improving research assessment. And Dora, one of the things that I'm the chair of, actually works to move away from journal kind of metrics, which is slightly bizarre given my job. But anyway, I really care about the research culture that underpins all that. So that's a bit of background. So just in case you haven't read the MJ from cover to cover this week, this is what we do. So there's two things that I'm primarily responsible for. On the left is the MJ, that's our website. Truly awful, it's getting improved, may even be mobile responsive, I'm hoping. That's actually this week's cover. We publish across the entire breadth of content, really, and I'll explain to you a little bit what that kind of looks like. On the right-hand side is Insight Plus, which is our news site. And I know people actually here have written for Insight Plus. I was talking to some folk yesterday. It's a great place to get a direct message out to an engaged audience of primarily medical practitioners. It can be quite newsy, so if you're thinking about that and want to do that, I'm really interested to hear from you. In addition to that, we also do special issues of the journal, and the two in the middle, the one with the beautiful walking stick at the top, and the one down here with the cover, it's a picture from the Torres Straits. The two issues we did this year on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health, and for those issues, they were led entirely by academics who are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, and it's a deliberate move for us to move away from research on Aboriginal populations by primarily white groups to it being much more of a community-led perspective, and that's something I've tried to do since I joined. And then we also do supplements, which can be sponsored, and I'll talk about one later on, but there's a couple there. The one on the right is the Maraminya, which is Aboriginal health ethics, and the one on the left is to do with the Healthy Countdown for child health. So we publish a really diverse set of areas. So what am I going to cover today? So I'm not going to slavishly go through these 3 points, but this is what I hope we'll come out with at the end, some idea of. So how do we approach publishing at the MJA? How we can support what you all do. And then I do want to just a bit of a public service announcement about some of the things that are going on in publishing at the moment that I'd really like everyone to be aware of. And the kangaroos are just there because I don't get to publish many pictures of animals. All right, so when I came in, we get more than 17. Last year we had more than 1,700 submissions. We published about 5% of them. This year we're on track to get many more than that. How do you kind of prioritise what you publish? So this is our broad way that we think about it. So high burden of disease in Australia. You can have the best paper on the world in heart disease in Chile, and we're not publishing it. High public health interest or things that are going to change clinical practice or policies. So COVID was a great example of that. As I said, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health-led research. And then uniquely Australian research. So actually, I did feel earlier this year that I could have finished my career because I finally managed to publish a platypus on the front cover of the journal. And this is a case report that you should look at because there's not actually many case reports in the literature of this. And it's not great if you get one of those spurs in your hand. And so we have a fantastic case report on that. So yeah, my job is now done. All right, so I guess the thing to think about is that I'm really aware that I sit right at the end of all that you all do. We publish, we are lucky enough to publish the outputs of an enormous diversity of research that comes from across Australia. And we are, very much one part of that system. So but I think how we fit within that system is that we can't do what we do unless all of these things are in place. So a system that supports genuine inquiry, and I was listening yesterday to the grand round and to the 5-minute presentations, and this idea of this learning health system, which is clearly you have to be in a system where you're asking the right questions and trying to answer them in an appropriate way. It seems like that's a system that you've got here. Unfortunately, we get a lot of papers where people write a paper because they've been told to write a paper, and it's I'm hoping that hasn't happened to any of you here, but it's definitely the case where we get papers coming into us that, they're not done through a sense of genuine inquiry. often there's not a clear hypothesis or a central idea behind them. Again, somebody's just been told you've got to tick this box, so you've got to get through the system. So, just write a paper, any paper. And, we do see a fair proportion of those, I'm so sad to say. The next point where things fall down on occasion is when people don't design it appropriately. So when is it appropriate to do a clinical trial? When is it appropriate to do a sort of quality improvement study? When is it appropriate to do qualitative analysis? You have to understand what the right approach is. And I think the key to that is getting the right advice early. And Adrian Barnett, who's a really good colleague of mine at QUT, would we need a statistician in every corner. Like literally, you cannot ask your statistician after you've got the revision back from the journal. That is too late. You need to be doing it before you design. So, getting advice early and taking it on board is really important. Goes with that sense, you've got to analyse things appropriately. It is kind of astonishing how often people don't. And then the whole issue about governance obviously is really critical. And does anyone know how long ago it was we started asking for trial registrations? Ballpark? It's more than 20 years now. We're still seeing papers where they're not registered. I mean, it's astonishing to me that people can be doing clinical trials in Australia where they haven't registered the paper. I mean, that's actually unethical nowadays, but people are still doing it. And sometimes it's because they're not actually clear whether it's a clinical trial or not, which is even scarier, to be honest. So I would love papers that have all of this in place. So when I was doing my research for this study, this presentation, I went off and looked at your web page, and there's a nice page from the library, and it's got a feed there from PubMed. So I sort of clicked on this, and I thought, I'll look to see what's on the feeds. And when I did it a couple of weeks ago, and then I had another look yesterday. And to my delight, the top paper, it's the MJA. So we're clearly doing really well here. Now, I'm sorry to say that actually, it's not actually a paper on health in South Australia. It's in New South Wales, but one of the authors is from here, so I hope that's okay. So I was pretty happy about that. I thought, okay, we're doing all right. We're getting in. We're certainly interacting with you in some way. And then I just went back and I did filter by the MJA, and these are the kind of papers that you're seeing. I'm hoping I can make this oh, there we go. All right. So really interesting papers. This one is, as I said, it's the New South Wales Sex Differences in Management of Outcomes of People with MI in New South Wales, metabolic associated dysfunction in fatty liver disease, consensus statement. We really love consensus statements, guidelines. If you want to do those kind of papers, if you've got one that you're thinking of doing, talk to us first, because we also see quite a lot of guidelines that are sort of done, shall I say, around the kitchen table or maybe after a dinner at a conference. Those are not the kind of guidelines we want. We want ones that are properly thought through. And then this one here, there's a great paper on long-term quality and safety of long-term aged care, and I'll talk a little bit about that one in a bit. So we're seeing a number of papers from here. So I'm pleased to see that it is on your horizon. So the other thing I thought, well, this talks about learning health systems, so I thought I might just see, well, what have we done at the MJA in that? And so there's a couple of things I'm just going to pull out. So one is from back in 2011. I don't know, does anyone here know Amy Abernathy? Oh, okay. Well, so on a quick look at her bio, my understanding is that she was at the FDA for a while, but she did her PhD at Flinders. So there you go. That's a really nice kind of link back. And this is from 2011. And I mean, what she says, I think, is incredibly relevant to what all of you are doing here. A patient-focused learning health system using integrated data sources will facilitate optimal care of individuals and result in better care of our populations and society, which I kind of think is what we're all about. So I thought this was a really nice editorial from that time. And then I obviously had a bit of amnesia, but I'd kind of forgotten that I actually written about this last year. So we have a thing that we call the editor's choice, which is basically our opportunity to pick out a few papers from each issue. And back in October last year, we had a range of papers that actually kind of fitted into this theme incredibly well. So the idea of, setting your targets, measuring the costs, looking at the outcomes, and learning the lessons from it. So I think, again, fair to say we're very interested in this whole area. Okay, so how do we do all of this? So my sense is that we are the curators of your work. I like to think of myself not so much as somebody who's trying to kind of keep the hordes of papers out, which sometimes it can feel like if you're getting a lot of papers, as to somebody who is lucky enough to be able to curate the research that you are all doing. So I'm really serious about the way that we should work, and this is what I say to my team, is that this should be a collaborative process between the editors and the Australian medical community. So we're not here to be combative. We're both on the same side. I mean, and I have had to say that occasionally, because sometimes when you spend a lot of your life saying no to things, it can make you feel like you forget the actual purpose of being there, which is to publish great research. Particularly since we only publish about 5% of what's submitted to us. So I spend a lot of my time saying no to people. We try to say it nicely. We can't publish all that gets submitted. We can't even peer review all that's submitted to us. And I'll show you in a minute what kind of that looks like. And it means that, but what we do try to do is have a process that we think is kind of respectful. So how does that work for you? I think there are 3 ways that we can support the kind of work that you're doing. So first is this idea of this validation of the research and opinion that goes through our processes that gives them legitimacy. And I thought yesterday the talk about the microbiome from David was great, because he talked, I mean, it sounded there like there was it was probably a fairly hard process, but the journal did work with him, and eventually what was published was an incredibly important body of work on the microbiome and vaccinations. So I think that is our ideal, that journals should be collaborative and help support what researchers are doing. I think a second thing we do is we're a venue for important discussion of important issues, and I'll talk about that, and then dissemination impact. So those are the 3 things that I think are our role in relation to what you all do. So what does validation kind of look like? So, I thought I've lost my animations. All right, give me a second. All right, so journals have pretty involved processes. Often I find that people have never actually met editor of a journal. They sort of think they've got 2 horns and, kind of crazy people. So just to say we're not. But we do, and they often think there's this complete black box of what happens to papers. Like you throw it at the journal, kind of it sits there for some time, and then eventually it comes out, and they have no idea what happened in the middle. I actually, just in case you think what's bad happens to your papers is bad, I spoke to a mathematician a couple of weeks ago, and he said he finally had his paper published that had been submitted 10 years ago. 10 years. So I don't think we've ever been that bad. But what do our processes look like? Well, they kind of look like this. So you've got your paper, you put it into our submission system, and then all of this stuff kind of happens in the middle. And I'd like to I'll talk you through it quickly, because I think it's worth thinking about. So it'll be sensible in relation to what I'm going to say later. So the first one is that there's a bit about that journal staff do. So that's is it kind of in the right format? Has it got all the figures? That sort of thing. Is there ethics, consent, that sort of stuff? And then there's a triage, this first editorial assessment. And that's usually done by quite senior people. That's myself or my deputy. And there we're looking to see whether it's very broadly in scope for the journal. And we reject about 1/3, sometimes even more of papers there. And what's a shame for these papers is that, people have gone to a lot of effort, they've formatted it, they've put it through our submission system, which is awful, and then it gets rejected because it's just not appropriate for us. And I think that's a waste of everybody's time, frankly. We then do a bit of work with our deputy medical editors. They do a closer read of papers that pass through that, and they'll be looking more closely at the methodology and also just referring back to other papers to see where it fits within the literature. And if it passes that, then it'll go for peer review. And we take really seriously, we try to use our peer reviewers carefully, because we know that everybody is burdened with peer review at the moment. So my view is that you should not be getting a paper to peer review unless it's worth your time. And if we send you a paper that's really appalling, that is not a good use of anybody's time. So we try to use peer reviewers quite selectively. Once the peer review comes back, it goes into this box here, and this is where we have an editorial meeting for us that happens every week. Every paper that's at a decision point comes to that meeting. We may then identify other editorial issues. Then there's a process of revision. Sometimes it goes through this cycle a few times, hopefully not too many. It can still be rejected at this point, but we hope not. And then if it's accepted, goes through some technical editing and publication. So there's a lot that happens in journals, and I regard it very seriously that we try and have this as an efficient process, but it does help us if we have papers that we are assessing that actually are appropriate for the journal. And I'll show you how we do that in a moment. Okay, so how do we decide what to publish? So again, these 4 criteria. So is it and you could say this for any journal. So I'm not just talking for the MJ here. So think about this when you're submitting your papers. So is it relevant to their audience, to that journal's audience? And it's, you will know this. You should know the journal you're submitting to. Don't submit to a journal that you've never read. I mean, it is quite astonishing to me how often people have clearly never read the MJA who submit to us. So you'll know the kind of things that the journal is like to be looking for. Contribution to the academic literature, I'll talk about that in a moment. Quality, strength or quality of the research or the evidence, again, I'll talk about that, and then the presentation. So this is what I mean when I say relevant to the journal's audience. So we're a general medical journal. I would love to be able to publish more papers, but actually we have to be selective because we have constraints on what we do. So will your submission be likely to be of a wide general interest outside of your specialty? And if you don't know that, give it to a colleague who works in another department and ask them. I mean, seriously, ask somebody outside of your immediate area. It's probably the quickest way to get a sense of what the interest is likely to be. I really like cover letters. I got told off at a presentation I did a couple of weeks ago about cover letters because they said this academic said to me, but you're trying to influence the editor. That only works if you've got a big name or whatever. Actually, that doesn't work. But what really helps me, because I'm not an expert in all of Australian medicine, you tell me why I should care about this. Why is this thing happening in Adelaide that I should know about? Maybe papers on the algal bloom. Perhaps I've never heard about that, and there's a health effect of that. That's, for example, that might be the kind of thing where you've got to tell a story so the editors understand why it's coming. So why this journal should consider it, a succinct summary, don't repeat the abstract, and then any other related information we need to know, that kind of stuff. So what about contribution to the academic literature? One of the things that I've got a background in research quality and in sort of reproducibility and such like. And I absolutely understand that we're not going to see the first paper or the last paper in any medical discussion, if there ever is that kind of thing. If a paper comes to us that we think has a sufficient advance on what's been happening, if it tells us part of the story that kind of is coherent with what's gone before, that is absolutely fine to us, including research that may have been done overseas that has then been applied to Australia. Those are the kind of things that we look for. So for example, and I'll show this in a bit, it doesn't have to be a trial that is positive. Actually, I hate the term positive and negative trial. If a trial is well designed and it answers a question, doesn't matter which direction it was in, that's a correct answer. That's a correct thing. So bear in mind, you don't have to kind of think whether or not this is right or not. So this and how do we select that? So this is one of the papers I showed you that I picked up from the feed. So this from a few weeks ago. It's a cross-sectional analysis looking at quality and safety of aged care in Australia. How do you kind of know whether or not what it adds? Well, we have this section in the journal. It's called. It's sort of a lay summary, whatever. The known, the new, and the implications. And the new is the bit that I think is often really helps with this. So what does it do? It talks about the variations, talks about the indicators such as emergent ED presentations, antibiotic use, etc. And then it points to what the implications might be. So this is kind of where you can tell the story about what the long-term, why this paper adds to what's in the current literature. And then strength or quality of research or evidence. So this is probably the bit that I spent a lot of time on when I was talking about it at the registry's meeting. And I think it is absolutely critical that we kind of think carefully about how you present your paper so that somebody else can assess how reproducible it is. I'll talk a bit about this in a minute, but we are in a real reproducibility crisis out there. There's a lot of really rubbish papers that are being published. And if you don't do your best job to kind of tell us exactly how reproducible, how well done your paper is, then you're not only sort of doing a disservice to yourself, to the journal, but sort of to the wider literature, we actually have a really critical point where the strength of evidence has really never been as important, I think. And I am a fan of good reporting. So I'll tell you, one of the reasons I'm a massive fan of good reporting and checklists is my father was a pilot. He was a fighter pilot. And I've got to tell you, there are a lot of checklists when you're a fighter pilot. And that's one of the reasons why, he survived being a fighter pilot and then, other pilot, because, the checklists are what get you through things. You don't forget to, I don't know, turn the engine on or whatever. But, see what I mean? There are some really critical things you do. I know that checklists in hospital are becoming increasingly important. I think they're incredibly important for what we do at journals. And my team have got incredibly bored about it, but they are now saying it back to me. When a paper comes to us that doesn't have a checklist, they'll go back and ask for it. So who's heard of Equator before I put this slide up? All right, everybody needs to now go Google Equator, because this will be the single most useful thing you'll do when you're writing your paper up. And the ones that are most important are the ones at the top. So Consort for clinical trials, Strobe for observational studies, which covers a multitude of sins for sure, and Prisma for systematic reviews. Those are the most important, but there is probably one for pretty much every study you choose to do, and they are immensely helpful. The thing about checklists are they don't improve, well, do they improve the quality of the work that you actually did? Probably not if you didn't think about it until you reported the paper, but they definitely tell us how reliable the paper is once you've done it. So I would really urge you to take a good look at them. I think they're great. And I'm going to talk about two sides of it. So I think that checklists bring rigor. So there's a checklist called the Tidier Initiative. Actually, I was having a funny conversation with somebody about acronyms yesterday. But anyway, this was a paper I was lucky enough to be involved in. Who'd heard of it before this? Oh, okay, one person. All right, so this is basically like, how did you do the thing? Like, how did you do that intervention? And it's not kind of complicated. So this is the whole checklist, which I'm just going to blow it up. So it's not complicated, but what did you use? What materials did you use? Who did it? And how did you do it? You probably think these are kind of really obvious things, but it's astonishing how many papers you have. So, well, we administer this questionnaire to these patients. Like, well, where's the questionnaire? It's like, which patients? Who did it? Was it the consultant? Was it somebody in ED? The kind of things where what you want to be able to do when you read a paper is, if you think it's important to your clinical work, is to pick it up, walk over to the relevant patient and apply it. And most of the time you absolutely cannot. So this is where this comes in. So I'm a big fan of this one. Tammy Hoffman was the lead author on that. She's a researcher up at Bond University, did a fabulous piece of work on it. So I really would recommend that to you. And the other thing that I think is really, so the second one that I'm going to talk about is flowcharts. So I love a good flowchart, and what's so important about flowcharts is because they kind of tell a story. So this is a paper this is a sort of negative trial that we published a few weeks ago, and it's about resilience to weather-related provocations, and it was a pragmatic trial that looked at a number of interventions, and it really didn't come up with some very clear evidence either way. Probably what they did did not really achieve the outcome they wanted, but it's such an unusual study that we thought it was really important for us to publish it. So we have that's the whole checklist. The whole flowchart. But isn't this fascinating? That this is the number they start with, 1,389. These are the ones they excluded. These are the ones but ended up in the trial, 548. These are the reasons they took them out. So these were the ones they eventually randomized. I just think this whole thing tells you a story to start with about how bloody hard this trial was to do, And I think that's an important thing to know. And it's very hard to wade through the paper to read that, but you can see that immediately from a checklist. All right. Okay. And then what about presentation? I won't go into this in great length, but I've got one message to you for this. Like, read the author guidelines. Please read the author guidelines. Okay. There's a story about a medical editor, actually Drummond Rennie. Has anyone heard of Drummond Rennie? He was an editor at the New England Journal. He actually died about a week ago, which I'm very sad about because he was a real pioneer in medical publishing. Anyway, he put into his author guidelines on about page 5, if you get to this point, I'll give you $100. He never paid out, okay? So please read the author guidelines. We spend a lot of time on them. We also spend time on our good reviewer guidelines. They're really good. They're simple. They say, we've got 4 questions to ask you. Please, can you look at the paper against that? And it really helps us enormously if you do that. So, yeah, please read the author guidelines, including the bit that says, do not use AI. I'll come to that in a minute. All right, so that's that. And then I wanted to just talk quickly about how we try and work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health research at the MJA. As one of the things that I did when I came in was to sort of have a lot of conversations with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander researchers, including some at SAMRI and across Australia. And these are the kind of messages that I got. One was around governance being the most critical, I think, making sure the governance was appropriate. So it's not okay to, have Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander researchers listed just to get a name on a paper. And there was a sense, I think, from the people that I spoke to that was happening too often. Reporting, again, there are some great reporting checklists for Aboriginal and health research, the fair and care principles, and the BADA data. Have you come across the BADA data? Yeah, so this is like how not to report Indigenous research. We try our best to have these papers reviewed by Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander experts. It's very hard because we know this is a community that has a lot of requests made of them, but that's what we try to do. And then we've done with regard to traditional knowledges, we ask to make sure that there's really careful work done there. All right, so 2 more things to talk about. All right, so venue for discussion of important issues. So everyone remember the story about engineered stone being banned? Okay, well, was anyone involved in that? I hope not to be preaching to people that know more about it than I do, which is always the case, often the case. All right, so when I saw this thing in the ABC, I thought, I wonder if there's an MJ story in that. And there was. They said the first case report was published in 2015. Back in 2015, that's right. Well, we published it in 2017. So this is the first case report of complicated silicosis due to engineered stone products. It was a case report. It was actually published in 2017. It was kind of funny. I went back and looked at the discussions that had happened at the time, and the team were like, is this important? I'm not sure it's important. Anyway, they published it, which is great. And then, a whole bunch of things happened. We published a narrative review on occupational lung disease in Australia. There was a conversation about a suggestion that there was a need for a national occupational diseases registry, which now is in place. And of course, now the ban on engineered stone is in place. And then I'm really happy to say that just a couple of weeks ago, we published this paper on silicosis research priorities, which was a research setting priority exercise done according to the way that the James Lind Alliance work. Who knows who the James Lind Alliance? Who knows who James Lind was? He was the first person to a clinical trial, probably. Actually, that's not quite true. But he was the one who tried to change. He treated sailors in the British Navy for scurvy, and he did a very uncontrolled. Well, he treated them with things from saline through to lime juice, lime and lemon juice, and the ones with the lime and lemon juice survived. And the real story about that was how bloody long it took it to get implemented, because the British Navy didn't believe him. And anyway, so it took about 200 years for that to actually get into the evidence base. So anyway, I really like this one because it combines all the things that I really care about. I love occupational diseases. I think, this evidence-based, this priority setting according to, but done by people who are, including people who had silicosis and their carers, was really important. And it talked about, what should the research agenda look like for silicosis. And this is a fantastic piece of legislation. Less than 10 years, really. It went from legislation from the first description to legislation. All right, last thing, dissemination and amplification of impact. Am I okay for time? Okay, all right. So this is a set of papers that I feel very kind of humbled to have published, actually. The Australian Child Maltreatment Study, it's a huge study which led out of QUT, but involved a huge number of individuals and organisations across Australia. it's a massive body of work that is ongoing. This is the important thing. This is the full paper, the whole set of findings, and we were lucky enough to publish a set of papers from it back in 2013, just after I started. So I can't take any credit for it, but what we have found and what they've said to us repeatedly is what we did there by publishing those in a supplement was to help amplify the reach of this, and it gave the kind of a sense to policymakers who were wondering whether or not they were going to consider this, that they really should do. Okay, I'm going to change tack a little bit, and we're going to talk about predators. So actually, that's a quokka. I also don't get to talk about quokkas very often. This is a bit of a public service announcement, okay? Because I really am very worried about the state of publishing outside of the journals that I'm involved with, and there are some bad things happening, and people in this room may well have been caught up in it. So I really want to just make sure that there's a understanding of where problems lie. So who's had any of these emails asking for, how many of you had today? 10? Yeah, a lot. Okay, so, and sometimes they look quite good. So this was one, like fact-checking AI in the era of fake news. Well, that probably could be my kind of area. This one was freeze-thaw dynamics and water pathways. Did I want to write on that? Actually, I was kind of having a bad day, so I was sort of thinking I quite fancied that as a new area. But, we get hundreds of these. Why are they such a problem? Because they're coming from scammers, predatory organizations, predatory journals, entities that this is a definition that was from a few years, a short part of a definition from a few years ago, entities that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship. And they are a deadly serious threat right now. And I just want to make sure that you don't stumble by accident into publishing with one of these people. So what are they doing? They are trying to get you to publish in these predatory journals. And then they may try and they also may try and sell you authorship in either these predatory journals or in other journals like ours. They may get you to try and review for them or put you on the editorial board of them. And I'll show you something in a second. We know that people accidentally end up on the editorial boards of these journals. Sorry, as I said, you may get sold authorship through these papers. So some people say there are extremely well-documented examples of, sites where they say, well, it's $1,000 for first authorship, $500 for fourth authorship, etc. It's as blatant as that. And then even worse, invitation to fake conferences, which again, is really horrible. And the consequences are horrendous. So, this is a study that was done in Canada a couple of years ago, and they looked at all the universities across Canada, including all the research-intensive universities, and every single university had publications in predatory journals. And then the conferences, this is a news piece from Nature, where somebody accidentally ended up accepting an invitation to go to a conference, paid their way, paid the fees, and then gave a presentation to an otherwise empty room. Can you imagine how devastating that is? It's just horrible. And it happens. I actually had a really weird one where I had a version of that where somebody offered to pay my travel or to organize my travel, and it turned out it was a scam. They were trying to get a deposit that I would give them, and then they would organize my travel. Complicated scams are happening all the time, and they're really worrying. And the problem is that, what's now happening as a result of these is that we're seeing mass retractions. So the one on the right is about Hindawi, which is a big publisher that's now gone. It was bought by Wiley for a huge amount of money. It's now gone out of business. Well, actually, Wiley had to retire the name because it was so problematic. And then, it's reaching the mainstream media. When The Guardian's saying this kind of thing, we need to really take it seriously. This is not kind of niche news anymore. The good news is there are tools and resources to help. So there's one thing, if you take away from this, go and look at this site. It's called Think, Check, Submit. Literally, think about, have you ever thought, have you heard about this paper? Has your boss ever published in it, etc.? It takes you through, it's another checklist, there you go. There's also Think, Check, Attend, same thing, Have anyone heard of it? Do people know about it? Would you actually go to it? COPE, which is the Committee on Publication Ethics, which I used to be involved with, is taking action against these kind of paper mills. But I think really critically, whatever editors do, academics have to not fall into the trap, because you're the people that are most affected by this. And then even UNESCO has come up. They've got this really nice thing here where they talk about the spectrum of behaviours, and it's just a really nice kind of walk through everything from low risk through to outright fraudulent. And again, really would encourage you to have a look at that. And then the final thing is we've got to talk about AI. I've got 3 things to say. First, please don't use it for your reviews. Please, please, please don't. It's not only a really bad thing to do because I don't want the opinion of an AI bot on a paper. I want your opinion. It's also a breach of privacy. You're basically taking a paper and throwing it out into the world and saying, hey, have a look at this. But I really want to use it. We hear this. People say, look, maybe English isn't your first language or whatever. If you're really going to use it, you better tell us, because if you don't and we find out about it, we'll retract the paper. I mean, I'm really serious about this. We've got to the point where we actually can't mess around with this anymore. But the last one is this, and I don't know if anyone saw this paper. It came out in Nature Reviews Bioengineering a couple of weeks ago. And it's got, the title is it's Writing is Thinking, and that's how we make our ideas, isn't it? And so I just thought this was a fantastic example of why AI is not a shortcut to anything, but actually, can actually damage our sort of intellectual processes. So I will stop there and happy to take questions.
Well, thanks so much, Jenny. Very stimulating, and I think maybe if I think about what you talked to us was the interaction between people who are writing, doing the work, and journals to get the best product that we can get. So we're working together. It's not us and them. It's together. And I think even almost political actions there with it are still very important. And of course this action against the predatory journal. So I'm going to open up for questions, but maybe just taking it sort of just to that piece. Can you talk to us about this? We've got this progressive paying for publication now, and there are some journals which are, excuse me, if you like, they come from specialist societies, and so the society through its conferences sort of pays for the publication of the journal, but other journals are not, and that it creates a barrier, an awkwardness to that. Can you tell us what your thoughts are about that?
Yeah, it's a really complicated problem, and so my conflict of interest in this is that the MJ is distributed by Wiley, so we are part of the read and publish deals that the Australian University Librarians negotiate with Wiley, so that's how we get some of our funding. What we actually need is a national approach. I mean, and one of the things I've been trying to do, part of my open access, is to actually advocate for a proper national approach so that you get this. There's a really great concept which people talk about of a bibliodiversity, which is that for a healthy system, you need every type of journal to exist. I mean, yes, the big ones, yes, the small ones, the ones that are kind of specialist, the ones that are more general. But to do that, you've actually got to deliberately design it. So I would say again, the pressure comes from academics in a way that is better from people like me, is putting pressure on your university executives to kind of be pushing for a national approach to this, because otherwise, you're right, there is this absolute piecemeal approach and it's really problematic.
Very good. Now, are there any questions here?
That was a fantastic talk. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask your opinion on which direction we're going in terms of general medical broad interest versus subspecialty interest. And if you took your field, of course, the tension is whether you spend your time reading a haematology journal that is highly relevant to tomorrow's activity, to having the broader professional interest in the influence of algal bloom or the other things. I just wondered which direction. Certainly in our day-to-day world, we're absolutely going into a direction of I might just speak up actually.
Oh no, well, just hold it up.
We're absolutely going in a direction of being super specialised in our day-to-day life, but one would like to think that we can balance that against a broader professional interest. And I wondered if you've seen a difference over your time in which direction that's going.
Yeah, it's a great question. And one of the things we do know nowadays is people actually very rarely read journals from cover to cover. I mean, we read table of contents, we skim them, but more often than not, in fact, we know that the way most people come to our papers, and this was true when I was actually at the Lancet, to be honest, is via Google. It's not even Google Scholar. You know, it's like people, they want to look on, you know, what the effect is on, you know, ambulance ramping in South Australia, and they'll just start with a Google search. And so I think there is definitely a sense that people don't browse in the same way that they did. I think it's one of the jobs of journals to kind of make them a bit sticky. So one of the things that we're hoping to do when we redo the website is to kind of, you know, do that kind of, well, you know, you read this, so what about that? You know, here's some other stuff that you might find relevant. I think that's quite important. But coming back to open access, one of the reasons why I think open access is such a useful thing is because somebody said to me, they were talking about how they ended up in a particular discipline, and they did it because they were kind of browsing and found an article that happened to be open access in a journal they would never read, It was like nanotechnology, and they were they were you know, cardiologist or something. And because of that, something happened and they read it, and then a whole field of research came out. So that's where I think why open research is so important, because you can make those connections even if you're not made to them by the journal. But one of the things I do try to do at the journal, I would like the journal to be the place where, you know, people feel like I've got to read that, because actually every week there'll be something in there. If it's not exactly my specialty, I need to know what that was. So that's my aim.
I'm a cardiologist, by the way. Get into nanotechnology.
Oh. Well, the New England Journal editor allegedly used to stand up at Harvard Medical School at the beginning of every year of intake, and he'd wave the New England Journal at them and say, "This is what you need to read for the rest of your lives," and he'd sign them up then.
Are there any other questions here? Michael.
That was a really helpful talk in terms of the processes that go on with your papers. I'm just one of the clinicians here, and we publish mainly sort of qualitative clinical trials, but lately been trying to publish more qualitative work rather than quantitative, some of our work, and finding a lot of frustration when we submit to a journal and the paper goes to review, gets as far as review, and then the review comes back, and it is really clear that the reviewer has very little understanding of the qualitative research approach. The questions around how do you select your reviewers, I'm sure that's a struggle for you, but it is very disappointing when you see a reviewer who doesn't understand what you've done.
Sorry, I don't know why that's doing it.
So the reviewer clearly doesn't understand the research approach and doesn't, you know, they'll say things like, "Oh, your numbers are too small." You know, and things like this. So I find that, how do you go about selecting your reviewers?
Yeah, so qualitative research is a great example of one that we struggle with. And I was literally having this conversation last night with somebody that we probably don't have sufficient expertise internally as well, because we have a very small team of editors. We take a lot of care about selecting reviewers. We will take suggestions from authors. We don't do it blindly, and we may use one or two of them, but not all of them. I think it's an area where we'd like to build our capability, and I am sort of acutely aware there are areas in the journal where we have a lack of expertise. So maybe I'll talk to you about being a reviewer. But I mean, but I hear it you when you say people come back with this. You know, it's not a big enough sample size. We try not to make sure that happens.
You had the Canadian study there that found all institutions had published in the predatory. So what can institutions do to protect staff?
Yeah, well, look, actually, one of the things I couldn't get into your intranet, obviously. I don't know, is there anything on your intranet about predatory journals?
I don't think so. Not obviously.
Right. There's a great. Well, I did have one that I know QUT's done a lot of work in this, and I have their one up. I think it is something where actually you just need to educate all the time, and the most important people to talk to in this are people who are beginning to publish for the first time. There's a real sense that people that are getting caught up, people who are doing thesis by publication. They get their first 2 papers, and the third one is like, oh my God, I've got 2 months to submit. I've got to get this paper in. Where am I going to do it? And those are the people that are getting caught by this. So education really early on of PhD students and early as people come into research is really critical. But I was actually talking to a senior academic yesterday who said she'd been caught up in a scam that she kind of hadn't realised. So it is actually at all levels. I think raising awareness is really critical. Yeah. So happy to talk. If there's any other groups you think it would be useful for me to talk to, I'm very happy to do that.
Thank you. Great presentation. Obviously, working in health, we're very focused on access to care and ramping and those kind of things. My question is in relation to your question around what do you think you should be doing or publishing? What are the kind of things that interest reviewers when they come through? Sorry, Andrew, I don't think it's working. Right. What are the top sub things that you guys are interested and more likely to go through to publishing based on the themes or the contemporary issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, we were having that conversation very recently because we're beginning to think now about what we're going to do next year. I actually think implementation is probably one of the things we're most interested in. I mean, although there are clear gaps in evidence, we do know that mostly there's a lot of knowledge out there that does not get implemented. So I think having that is an area I'm very interested in. I'm very interested in climate and health, so for an obvious reason. So that'll be an ongoing area of interest for us. I think chronic diseases, but thinking about it in a really holistic fashion, because that plays into the burden of disease, is probably one of the things that I'm most interested in. Those are probably the main ones. But what the balance is, having a big picture, but at the same time making sure that it's actually relevant to things that will change people's policy or how they practice. We do know that when we publish that are policy related, we often publish a lot of papers that are research, but if they're well written and they end up being solid research, they end up changing policy. We know that policymakers read the MJ. People tell me if they publish a policy piece in the MJ or that their email box lights up, and it's not just with their colleagues, it's sort of outside of that. So I think papers that can change policy probably are the ones that can have the biggest effect.
Jeannie, that's I really want to pick up on that just as we finish up there, because I think as we choose where we publish, and Jenny's quite clear with me that we all have choice. We don't have to publish in the MJA, we can. But in choosing where you publish, it's to get to the right audience as well as every other effect. And you need to think about the audience. So if you've got a policy issue, just heard the answer to that. And I think that, the local context, Australia, all those things are good reasons for us to think about it. Not always, not all the work, of course, but some of the work there, that's a really important message. So look, thanks so much. When we finish the session, I think Ginny will be around for a little while having a cup of coffee. Our coffee van did arrive. There'll be some pre-made coffee for everybody. Please, I'm sure she'll be please take questions once she's got a coffee in hand, at least. Just as we're moving on to this next section, I realised that I hadn't thanked Hospital Research Foundation Group and Paul Flynn and Jim Deep. Thanks so much for coming along with your teams today and supporting us. That's fantastic. We're very grateful, and I think a lot of the feedback that we've had from everybody that we've spoken to who you've helped us support has been that this work wouldn't have been possible without it, and that's made a big difference to our organisation, and we hope to share that both within our organisation and around South Australia and around the country and internationally when it's appropriate. So thanks so much for that, and now I'm just going to move on and talk about a couple of these presentations, because what we'll do now is talk about people who've had some grants, who've got some work they will briefly present to us. We'll have coffee and then we'll come back and we'll announce the 2025 outcomes. So Ben Riley. I'm not going to give you a talk, Ben. So, where are you, Ben? Coming down. Thanks so much, Ben. Ben has been, really part of our furniture now, I think, and really important part of that, and we really appreciate it, Ben. So pleased to hear from you.
Here. Oh, thanks.
We live in a time where gambling regularly has become normalised. Advertising space is saturated with gambling promotions, and it's near impossible to watch a game of footy without being informed of betting odds. The gambling landscape has changed considerably, and so have the victims of gambling addiction. In our clinic, we are seeing an increasing number of young people present with gambling addictions that developed in high school. The good news is that effective treatments are available, they work, and people get better. However, for a range of reasons, very few gamblers with problems access help. Less than 10%. For those that do, it's typically because things have reached crisis point. Imagine you have a family member or a close friend with a gambling problem. They refuse to admit it, don't want to talk about it, or they acknowledge it but refuse to seek help. In a moment of desperation, you decide to phone a service to seek advice about encouraging your loved one to get help, only to be told that while help is available, they need to initiate it themselves. They need to be ready. So there's not much you can do other than keep yourself safe. In the addiction treatment setting, the popular notion that a person needs to be ready for change prevails, despite a body of evidence supporting the idea that friends and families of treatment-resistant, substance-dependent individuals can motivate their loved ones to enter treatment using principles of operant conditioning. Families are taught to use positive reinforcement to shape their environment. External positive reinforcers are initially used and then gradually faded as intrinsic reinforcement takes over. If you like, the taste of water becomes naturally reinforcing and sugar cubes are no longer needed. This approach has been demonstrated to be effective in helping move alcohol, opiate and cocaine addicted loved ones into treatment. However, to date it has not proven effective for gambling problems, despite 4 published attempts, 3 from Canada and 1 from Sweden. Over the past 5 years, based on our own research and the literature to date, our team has carefully designed a unilateral intervention to help families and friends of treatment-resistant heavy gamblers enter treatment. We've recently completed a feasibility randomised control trial. We use the consort reporting guidelines, and being a feasibility trial, our primary outcomes of interest were feasibility related, so testing the procedures of the trial, such as proportion recruited, dropout rate and completeness of outcome data. Secondary outcomes related to efficacy signals of the intervention, so specifically treatment entry of the gamblers along with the wellbeing of participants. 30 participants who lived with or had regular contact with a friend or family member with a gambling problem and who was resistant to seeking help were randomised to the intervention or standard care. Standard care comprised education about problem gambling, protecting finances and stress management. The intervention group were taught to use 5 graded sets of responses designed to increase motivation to the gambler to change. For instance, one lady cooked a special meal for her husband when he didn't bet on the Friday night footy, but withdrew herself when he'd gambled. Both groups received up to 6 sessions with a master's level therapist. Participants were of a variety of relationship to the gambler. Just 13% dropped out of the study without attending any therapy sessions, and 2/3 provided follow-up data. So while we learned a lot and can make some improvements, we're happy with the protocol. So what about client outcomes? Do either of the interventions lead to any gamblers entering treatment? 7% of gamblers with a friend or relative in the standard care group entered treatment, compared to 60% of those receiving our intervention. On participant wellbeing, we observed greater improvements on all measures of the intervention group, from psychological distress, depression, work and social functioning, and family relationships, so family cohesion, expressiveness, and the greatest improvement in family conflict. So in conclusion, our feasibility outcomes demonstrate the trial protocol was suitable to evaluate efficacy, and we detected a signal in favour of our intervention, indicating a fully powered trial is the next appropriate step. And we've used this pilot study to conduct power calculations and apply for a grant to do an efficacy trial. So we're waiting the outcome of that, and we've just submitted this paper for consideration, for publication. And we're also writing up a qualitative study that we nested in the RCT of participant experiences. So we're very, very grateful to receive the grant to get this small pilot off the ground and running, and it's given us a really solid step to build on. Thanks very much.
Really impressive, Ben. Actually, fantastic work. And I think, good luck with your grant. We've got time for one question, maybe. If not, I think the coffee is going to be calling us all, and we'll keep moving. But thanks so much. Wonderful. I'm pleased now to ask Jiajin, who's nurse consultant for safety, quality and risk in the intensive care unit here at SALHN, to come up and speak about some patient flow matters. So research and patient flow, a mixed methods evaluation. So thanks, Shah.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. First, I would like to thank the Flinders Foundation and the Hospital Research Foundation for their generous support. I'm also so proud to be part of a growing community of nurses who are driving research to improve care through implementation science. Well, I actually presented the preliminary results last year, so I'll be really brief with the first few slides. So, constrained ICU resources and increased demand for ICU beds are a consistent challenge across the globe, which has led to significant patient flow issues in the ICU. So these issues are detrimental to patient outcomes as well as system efficiency. So centralized patient flow centers, including SALHN Operational Center (SOC), have been implemented across various health service organizations, aiming to optimize patient flow and improve efficiency. However, their effectiveness have been under-evaluated. So my project actually was aimed to evaluate SOC's impact on ICU patient discharges and patient outcomes, and also we would like to explore what barriers and facilitators to the ICU discharge process. And so this mixed method study has two components. The first component is a quantitative cohort study. We actually included over 8,000 patients admitted to Flinders ICU 2 years prior and 2 years post-SOC, and with the primary outcome was ICU discharge delay, after hours discharges, and readmissions. You can see in the table, we actually highlight in red. We actually observed a higher proportion of patients experienced ICU discharge delay and after hours discharges, however, without an increase in the ICU readmissions. We also acknowledge that there was a significant increase in the hospital presentations over the last few years, which may have added pressure and increased demand for inpatient beds, which may subsequently impact the ICU discharge timing. We also observed differences between these two cohort patients. You can see in the post-SOC group, there was a higher proportion of patients with medical diagnosis and also patients with higher clinical frailty scores. We all know as clinicians, it's very challenging every single day to find the most appropriate bed for complex medical patients, which may impact the ICU discharge timing and lead to ICU discharge delays. And the second outcome is ICU and hospital length of stay and hospital mortality. So despite the increase in ICU discharge delay and after-hours discharges, there was a significant reduction of hospital mortality as well as length of stay, which actually aligns with the objectives of SOC of aiming improved patient flow and outcomes as well as efficiency. The association between ICU discharge delay and a lower hospital mortality is quite consistent with the findings from previous research by Professor Bahari back in 2022. And so the component 2 is mixed method observational study. We observed 22 ICU discharges and interviewed 33 staff who were involved in the ICU discharge process. So the key findings were all of these 22 patients experienced ICU discharge delays, and the main reason of delay was there was no hospital bed, no ward beds were not available, or there was limited isolation room that we can accommodate patients with MROs. So this finding again is quite consistent with the findings from previous research done in Queensland. So the data analysis for the interviews continues. Hopefully I will be able to report back next time. So some take-home message is the implementation of SOC alone did not reduce ICU discharge delay and after-hour discharges. However, there was a significant reduction in the hospital mortality as well as length of stay, which may be contributable to improved communication, collaboration, and coordination by interdepartments. So the organizational factors such as high hospital occupancy, limited ward capacity, as well as staffing issues are very complex and should be investigated to understand their impact on the effectiveness of centralized patient flow centers. Hence, target interventions can be tailored and implemented. And for future study, also need to measure and validate the intended outcomes or observed outcomes of centralized patient flow centers, incorporating ICU access block metrics to improve patient flow. Got it? So my next step is also my PhD project is to co-design a clinical ICU discharge pathway, hoping to optimize patient flow. Thank you.
Well, it's very nice, Shah. Well, I know Shah obviously worked in the ICU. Are there any questions, or can I ask you then?
Yeah.
I mean, the point, people may not be familiar, but there's a big body of data that says that after-hours discharge is associated with adverse events from the ICU. You didn't find that. And Matt, you're postulating that maybe there is a whole lot of cultural factors that are going on that you're going to look at in the future. Can you tell us about why you think that happened, or what do we need to know next?
Well, I guess I'll probably present, thank you for the question, Andrew, probably presented in there, as I mentioned, it's also part of the limitation from my study that we actually did not include the ICU, the hospital occupancy presentation metrics as part of the data analysis to try to understand what's the impact on the ICU, on the ICU discharges. I guess, over the last few years, the hospital has been really busy. The ward capacity is very limited, so which impact the ICU discharge timing. And there are benefits to it. I think it has been proved by few researchers.
Thanks, Shah. That was great.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. Did you look at if there was an increase in MET calls? So we might not have had an increase in readmissions, but maybe with the later transfers when home teams are not around and reduction in nursing staff. And we have noticed that there has been an increase in MET calls that has been trending up. Did you look at that?
Andrew, certainly there have been increased MET activities over the last few years. However, this is a retrospective study, so we actually didn't incorporate any MET-related data into this data analysis. Certainly, I only done the preliminary data analysis for the interviews. The staff's feedback, are very interesting. So when I report back next time, so hopefully there will be some answers to it. Thank you, Angie.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Shah.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, Fiona Cossey, who's a clinical trial nurse coordinator, talking about improving early detection and pathways for anxiety and depression post-cardiac surgery, a local experience. Thanks so much, Fiona.
Thank you. Sorry. So the Cardiac Surgery Quality and Outcomes Unit, led by Professor Rob Baker, we're fortunate, thank you, to receive some grant funding in 2023. I'd like to take this opportunity today to thank the Hospital Research Foundation and the Flinders Foundation for generously supporting this work. We know that symptoms of anxiety and depression are well known to be more highly prevalent in a cardiac surgery population than among the general population. We also know that untreated anxiety and depression can be known to potentially worsen the cardiac outcomes. Since 2009, the CTSU have routinely utilised the PHQ-9 depression screening tool. We use this during our routine phone follow-up at 1 and 6 months post-operatively. Whilst this action was fairly innovative and commendable on its own, the potential was there to further adapt the process and refine it to improve outcomes for our patients. In the last 2 years, using this PDSA framework, which is a fairly iterative process, we've made significant changes to help with the early detection and referral for patients who have screened positive for anxiety and depression in the post-op phase. We know that patient-reported outcome measures such as PHQ-9 and the EQ5D are useful for detecting a change in a patient's quality of life over time, such as prior to cardiac surgery through to the post-op period. We also recognise that with almost 20% of our cardiac surgery population here at Flinders identifying as Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander, we identified a clear need to implement culturally appropriate patient-reported outcome measures. Our Enquiry grant funding has allowed us specifically to focus on collaborating with the Menzies School of Health Research and leverage their existing mental health app, Stay Strong, which is a strengths-based mental health tool designed for use amongst First Nations Australians. Having a little look at our journey since winning this grant in 2023, one of the first steps we did was we analysed the enablers and barriers for completing the PHQ-9. So as a result of this, we found that the PHQ-9 was quite burdensome, and we actually progressed to the PHQ-2 and included the GAD-2, which is anxiety screening. Alongside this, importantly, we developed a formalised referral process for patients who did screen positive. We were also able to utilise some earlier work that was done by Professor Alex Brown and colleagues, in which the PHQ-9 has been culturally adapted and validated into an Aboriginal English language. And at this time, the other important step that we took here was a collaboration with the Commission on Excellence and Innovation in Health, and we were able to participate in the piloting of a digital program to deliver patient-reported outcomes. This was done through the ZDoc app, where patients could self-identify as Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander and would be led to culturally appropriate resources if they did screen positive for anxiety or depression. So these screenshots show a quick example of how a patient would click on a link that was sent to their phone, and this is how they could complete the EQ5D mobility section, clicking using those radio buttons. This one here is a visual acuity score where they rate their health from 0 to 100, and this final screenshot shows how the PHQ-2 was worded in the adapted Aboriginal English as the work from Alex Brown. On completion of these screening tools for anxiety and depression, patients were directed to a list of appropriate mental health resources, and email alerts were set up to notify clinical staff in the unit of any high scores. Unfortunately, due to funding cuts, ZDoc was later decommissioned despite the positive progress we'd made. We're now working with digital health to see which options we can pursue in the future, which might align with this, such as REDCap. Of course, running in parallel to all of this in the background was the core of our work, was to have these prompts translated into 5 Indigenous languages. The 5 languages that we chose were identified by our Aboriginal health practitioner on 6B as some of the commonly spoken languages amongst our cardiac cohort. And this has really been our biggest achievement, has been the successful translation after some initial barriers. And we're now waiting on these translated prompts to be implemented into the Stay Strong app, which again is the Menzies Health app, and so that we can really trial it out in our cardiac surgery population. We also have access to fully translated written and audio bites of the PHQ-9 and the EQ5D. This here is just, again, that mobility section of what the EQ5D looks like ordinarily on paper. And as you can see here, after our collaboration with Ethnolink for the translation, on the right-hand side, it's been translated to Anandili Yakwa. And just at first glance, you can see it's clearly a little bit more wordy. So we've, again, that's just the mobility section, and we've really just had some feedback in the early stages at the moment with our end users. And the suggestion was made that perhaps this might be a bit wordy, maybe a bit not so visually appealing. And so the suggestion was made that we could potentially put it into another format, which was a bit more culturally appropriate, perhaps using some earthy colours in a pictorial format. From that, we've just got a bit of a concept going at the moment where this is the mobility section, and if all goes to plan. Did that work? Keep going. So mobility is in the centre there. This is the first response where you might say, I have no problems walking around.
Na nglakachama yuan kuraria yeya ngayua yurari ngo yeya rapan nglakacham ningena.
And this last step is I'm unable to walk around. So sorry, that was a progression from the first through to the 5 different states on the mobility domain. So as you can see, it's been a bit of a work in progress. We think we've made some significant changes. Certainly, the key aspect is to try and make some of these patient-reported outcome measures more culturally appropriate in the best way possible, and to try and look after our culturally diverse cardiac surgery population. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jen. I'm going to keep going to try to stay on time, but say thanks very much. I'm sure Fiona will be out there having coffee, and you'll be able to grab her afterwards if you wish. Our next speaker is Joanne McIntyre, who's ICU coordinator here at SALHN. She's going to talk about ICU nurses' knowledge, attitudes and involvement in clinical research, a national survey, the Clarity Study. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to the Hospital Research Foundation and SALHN for supporting my project. So I'm here today to talk about my project, which centres around clinical research in critical care, and I guess in Research Week, what else are we going to talk about? We now understand that research is not just an academic exercise, it's a life-saving priority. And again, in Research Week, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. But when healthcare systems actively engage in research, the quality of care improves and lives are saved. Studies consistently show that hospitals involved in research deliver better treatments and better outcomes for critically ill patients. Some of the most transformative breakthroughs in ICU practice, like glucose control and fluid resuscitation, came from landmark studies. These findings didn't just change one hospital's protocols, they changed protocols across the globe. But ICU research is different. It demands rapid decision-making, multidisciplinary coordination, and ethical sensitivity that other settings may not require. And research conducted outside of the ICU often can't be translated into our area. But behind every successful study is a team of nurses. ICU nurses play a vital role, administering interventions, recording data, ensuring protocols are followed. Yet their contributions are often undefined, with no clear roles or structured frameworks. Nurse-led studies are rare. Funding's limited, trials led by nurses few and far between. But at SALHN, as evidenced today, we're definitely getting better at that. But nurses are disengaged from research, and they tell me regularly in the ICU, I hate research. I want to change that mindset, and it's become my passion and my purpose. So I've started my PhD, not to promote research, but to change a culture. So I started with a literature review using the JBI methodology for mixed method studies. My aim was to synthesise research evidence on critical care nurses' attitudes, involvement and knowledge to research. I registered the review in Prospero and searched multiple sources with studies screened from 2000 to 2024. And after critical appraisal, quantitative findings were transformed into qualitative format for synthesis of results. After screening, I included 11 studies. There were 9 cross-sectional surveys from the USA, Canada, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the UK, and international networks, and 2 qualitative studies from Denmark and Finland. I identified 5 themes: attitudes to research, research involvement, research education and capability, research communication and dissemination, and barriers and facilitators to research engagement. In summary, ICU nurses recognise the importance of research in improving patient care, but workload pressures, limited education and communication gaps hinder engagement. Many have experience caring for research participants, but few contribute to study design and publication. Motivation, curiosity and structured guidance can enhance engagement. This manuscript is currently under review. But despite extensive research, Australia remains unexamined. So I developed the Clarity Study with 3 main aims looking to explore the knowledge, attitudes and involvement of Australian ICU nurses and what they have to clinical research. So Clarity is a cross-sectional online survey inviting all ICU nurses across Australia. Recruitment was conducted via the ACCCN and ANZIC's websites, professional networks and social media. Data collection tool consisted of 72 questions, including 1 open-ended question, and was developed from the surveys that we identified in the literature review. We also added some extra questions from the previously validated tools that were particular interest to us. Recruitment was open for 2 months and closed in June. So for our results, we ended up finally with 212 responses. The mean age of nurses was 41 and 89.6% were female, which correlates with nursing numbers across Australia. 71% of nurses worked at the bedside and 81% had a postgraduate qualification, and we had 3% of nurses with a PhD. 84% of nurses recognised that there was a research coordinator working in their unit, and 33% had attended a research meeting. 21% had presented at a conference in some capacity, poster, oral presentation, and only 22% were a member of a research committee. 40% had attended a journal club, while only 14% had presented at a journal club. We're currently doing the rest of our statistical analysis looking at correlations, and I'm hoping to have this manuscript submitted for publication by Christmas time. Thank you.
It's a lot of work.
Thank you.
Yeah, great stuff. I'm going to keep going, Jo, but no, very clear. Excellent, thanks. Good presentation. Our next speaker is Dr. Hua Xin Nenji, who's a medical scientist in clinical pharmacology. We heard from medical scientists on Tuesday, so some great presentations there as well. This one's on the impact of comorbidity patterns on mortality and length of stay in hospitalised patients with atrial fibrillation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Andrew. My name is Hua Xin. I'm very pleased to be here to share the finding of our study looking at the patterns of comorbidity and their impacts on health outcomes in hospitalized patients with atrial fibrillation, or commonly known in acronym as AF. So I'll start off by giving you a background information on this topic. AF is the most common types of arrhythmia in older adults aged 65 years and above. AF is also a frequent cause of hospital admission and prolonged hospitalization associated with significant costs. However, there is limited data on how different combinations of comorbidity occur in AF patients and their impacts on health outcomes. Therefore, the aim of this study was to investigate the patterns of comorbidity and their relationship with 12-month mortality and length of hospitalization. Moving on to the method section, we use inpatient hospital data from Flinders Medical Center, covering a period of 10 years from 2009 to 2018. We identified all patients admitted to FMC during the study period with a documented AF diagnosis. We extracted all their medical diagnoses and categorized their comorbidity into 31 broad disease grouping. We then use unsupervised machine learning technique called latent class analysis to study the patterns of comorbidity and to identify the subgroups of patients that share similar characteristics within this heterogeneous population with AF. We have two outcomes of interest, including 12-month mortality, that is death from any causes within 12 months after being discharged from the hospital, and the length of hospitalization categorized into two categories, less than 10 days versus 10 days or more days, 10 or more days. Moving on to the results section, we included a total of 12,555 patients with AF. Nearly half of them were female, and the mean age of the study population was 75 years, which is expected as AF is more common in older adults. Using the latent class analysis, we identified 3 distinct patterns of comorbidity and label them as phenotypes 1, 2, and 3, as shown in the chart here. Phenotype 1 comprised about 2/3 of the study population, which is the majority of the study population with a low burden of comorbidity. Phenotype 2 comprised of 1/3 of the study population with a high comorbidity burden. And the last phenotype, 6% of the study population with a high prevalence of selected conditions, including cerebral vascular disease, hypertensive disease, and nervous system disorder. This figure shows the results for the 2 outcomes measure. When reading this figure, x-axis shows the adjusted hazard or odds ratio generated by some statistical analysis methods, and y-axis shows the 3-class model identified using the latent class analysis. Any number that falls above 1 indicates a higher risk. So for the first outcomes, 12-month all-cause mortality, the risk of dying from any causes within 12 months was significantly higher in phenotypes 2 and 3, with the hazard ratio range from 1.69 to 2.25. For example, 1.69 here means the risk of dying was 69% higher in phenotype 3 compared to phenotype 1. For hospitalization, the odds of being hospitalized for 10 days or more were also very much higher in phenotype 2 and 3, with the odds ratio range from 4 to 8.5. In summary, this study identified 3 comorbidity phenotypes using latent class analysis and showed distinct association with 12-month mortality and length of hospitalization. Our findings suggest that phenotyping is useful in identifying high-risk group of patients that may benefit from targeted intervention. Risk-stratified care management may help improve the outcomes of this study population. Before I end my presentation, I'd like to acknowledge the funder, Flinders Foundation, and the Hospital Research Foundation for providing us funding to conduct this research project, and my team member, Professor Arduino Mengoni and Professor Richard Woodman. As a team, we have published a couple of studies related to this project, and I'm happy to share the paper with anyone who might be interested in this topic. Thank you all for listening.
That was just excellent. Thank you. In my area, so in lung injury and in sepsis, the latent class analysis has just changed the whole way that we think about things, and I think is going to be built into EMRs in the future to help us with the decision making around these patients as well. So it's great to see this work coming forward. So congratulations on that. Our last speaker, Rowan Miguel, who's a senior physiotherapist in cancer care, is going to talk about cancer survivor and family preferences for prehab for cancer surgery, a discrete choice experiment. So thanks, Rowan.
Cool. Imagine you are 80 and after 5 months of weight loss, fatigue and difficulty eating, you've just been diagnosed with esophageal cancer. The plan is 2 months of chemo, then an 6 to 8 hour operation with a typical complication rate of 30 to 50% in Australia. In the midst of this, you are told to stay active and eat well. Currently, this is the norm, yes. Patients are told to stay active, eat well and manage their stress, but are often not referred to any services or supports, mostly because they don't exist, especially those that are responsive or affordable. So we expect patients to start these behaviours on their own in the most stressful times of their life. This is the big problem. We have an ageing population, the silver tsunami, which comes with huge increases in cancer incidence and prevalence. This means more people are being offered major surgery, often to those already frail or those that become frail through treatment. Improvements in cancer treatment aside, this results in huge surgical complications and costs. Now, imagine if these patients were buffed up and prepared for surgery. Imagine you had a team of health professionals come around the patient to build up their buffers to withstand their treatment course. That's what our team is interested in. How can we get patients and family members to engage wholeheartedly in prehab for cancer surgery? And two, how can we get health systems to provide this service and in a way that patients will actually engage with and adhere to? Now, prehab research in cancer and surgery is booming too fast to create coordinated efforts on delivery, content, and patient identification. But more and more studies are showing effectiveness at reducing complications and improving recovery. However, most studies show very poor uptake and very poor adherence, and most studies are research initiated which naturally die off when the funding dries up. Most studies and trials are very intense, frequent hospital visits, exercise testing, travel, or they're very passive, providing information, websites, apps, pamphlets, which don't often translate into any real change. So this explains all the uptake and adherence issues. And that also leads to our really cool experiment. So our team created a discrete choice experiment to figure out what patients and their family members actually want. They were presented with the option of 2 prehab programs, as what is on the screen. They would then decide which one they would actually go to. Then we would show them 2 more programs with slightly different characteristics and ask them to choose again. We kept going until they had seen 6 different pairs of prehab programs. Now, why did we make them do this survey? It helps us understand what trade-offs participants are willing to make. So the trade-offs could be they're happy to come into the hospital multiple times a week if it means my recovery is quicker or get back to work. Or I'm happy to have a high risk of death as long as I don't have to exercise. So we then collated all the responses and analysed using statistical models based on random utility theory. With this, we are then able to see which characteristics participants tried to include in their programs and which they tried to avoid. And we had 131 participants, mostly from breast and abdominal cancer patients. So what you're all here for, I'm imagining. To get patients to engage, they wanted fortnightly or weekly contacts compared to 2 or 3 appointments per week. They wanted telehealth or phone contacts compared to hospital visits. They wanted nutritional support compared to none. Interestingly enough, for me as physio, more exercise was more appealing, which I don't know if I believe yet. Unsurprisingly, shorter recovery was preferable, and the risk of death did not influence the choice at all. So, what does an ideal program look like? We then had them build their own program, so taking away the annoying choices, and it gives us some more detail. Broadly, their priorities did hold stable. In the BYO, the Build Your Own, participants were wanting more contact with the prehab team, and they wanted both psychology and nutritional support. So why is this difference here? The BYO, it's a menu of what patients would ultimately want that doesn't require any prioritisation or trade-offs, indicating that we need to be flexible and individualise the input. The trade-offs prioritise what the patients were, what means the most to the patients in a resource-constrained environment. So why this matters? Implementation of new services directly from research is fraught with danger. We can't copy and paste. Local context dictates success. There has been little work on Australian perspectives to prehab for cancer surgery so far, especially in the public health setting. So from our previous research, we know patients want this, and we know that health professionals want this. But we know that prehab trials that involve frequent hospital visits and high intensity training and all the travel isn't going to be popular in an Australian context, leading to worse engagement and less benefit to the patient's journey. So this study shows that patients do want to do prehab, but on their own terms, mostly from home with frequent contact with health professionals. These results suggest that the most acceptable program makeup and design that appeals to most of our SALHN patients. Without this local understanding, we can't build a successful program, and the complications, length of stay, access issues, and poor outcomes will likely continue. So our next steps to implement a model of care ensuring both feasibility and effectiveness while building our presence and influence on those in health leadership for the money. I'd like to thank the Flinders Foundation and the Hospital Research Foundation for funding the SALHN Enquiry grant round. Without this, we would not be able to carry out this research into how to best prepare our patients for surgery. And I'd also like to thank the Research Hub for their ongoing guidance and support with the hurdles that came up in this project. So thank you very much.
Okay, well, you didn't let us down. Another great presentation. Thanks very much. I'm going to let you go because I need a coffee. But please, we'll break now after you've thanked all of the speakers who've done such a great job. But please join us again at 2:30 because we've got a little bit more to go, and we're going to announce the outcomes and maybe a couple of prizes. Is that right? No, just the outcomes. Okay, perfect. Okay. afternoon, we might start our final session of Research Week. So a great relief to our organising team, but no, the organising team's done a fantastic job, and I just want to call them out again, particularly Lauren, who's really done so much work with Danny, the whole team, done a fantastic job here. It's been a wonderful week. So this is our final session. It's always a bit of celebration for some, maybe not so much for others, and you'll probably hear what a tough process it's been. But before I go any further, I'd like to introduce Kerry Mann, who's our Chief Executive Officer at SALHN. Thanks, Kerry.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here, and I opened Research Week earlier this week. I hope you can hear me. I'm slightly too tall for this. It is fantastic to dedicate a week to thinking and sharing about our research, because as I said earlier this week, it's about the lifeblood of Flinders Medical Centre, why we started. We're innovative, we're a learning knowledge organisation, no fuss, we do it well and we get it done. And I think having a week dedicated to our research is a wonderful way of sharing and multiplying that. So thank you for joining us and giving your time, and I know there's been many people in different sessions, and thank you for the people online as well for giving your time. There's been an amazing lineup just looking down. I couldn't attend all of it, but so many talented researchers. A great way to start, is looking at research communication and compelling messaging, because if you can't convey that message in a really compelling way, you don't spread the knowledge as much as attract the funding. And then ending on the key role of reporting findings, equally a strong message. But I was really impressed that we had so much nursing and midwifery and medical scientists and allied health as much as our medical researchers, and so really distributing our knowledge across all fields and encouraging early researchers is fantastic. Can I just acknowledge how much work goes into posters? I know that. I'm from quite an academic family. I know the angst of what will I put on my poster. It's very stressful. First time you do a poster is quite, a big experience. And even just getting your messages when you know so much about your topic down to that 3 minutes is such an effort. So thank you to the researchers who presented this week. Now, it is integral to what we do, but the purpose of it matters so much. It's about the health and well-being of our community and even ourselves in the community. I think I said earlier this week, we unashamedly should provide the best care to our community, because that's what they deserve. So I hope you've seen and heard a commitment to research here at SALHN and at Flinders Medical Centre. It's very much about our world and our journey. I also just wanted to thank Professor Andrew Burston and the team, Simon, Lauren, and all of the others. It takes a lot to put together a week that runs this smoothly. And when you just look at the number of topics and all of the thinking that went behind that, they're a really strong team, strong governance, strong support. So thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Minister Nat Cook for joining us this afternoon, who's going to come up in a minute. Nat is the Minister for Human Services, Seniors and Ageing Well, and so relevant to our world and also disability. And we have a lot of useful conversations about how do those most complex patients enter our system and go back into the community, and how can we improve the connection between our services. So thanks for showing the passion. I know your roots are here. And knowing that research and inquiry, goes to the future and with your portfolio as well. I also really wanted to thank the Hospital Research Foundation Group, and I know Paul Flynn had to go. Jim Deed is here and will help hand out some announcements in a moment. But this inquiry grant round that we have is aimed at supporting our research direction overall. We couldn't have done it without the generosity of the Hospital Research Foundation Group, so thank you. So what I'll do now is hand over to Minister Cook and Jim. I hope that you have all enjoyed Research Week 2025. We've already started concocting what we're going to do next year. So if you've got any ideas, please put them forward to us, and I look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you.
Namani, Nanari Nat Kartanya, Mani Nadlu Tempenti, Nadlu Ghana Yatanga Imparinti, paying my deep respects on stolen Aboriginal land to Aboriginal leaders of the past, the present, and also young leaders into the future. And segueing from that into research is absolutely vital, because we know that our Aboriginal brothers and sisters are on the wrong end of nearly every measure when it comes to health and life expectancy and outcomes. Although I have to say, I went to a celebration of a 92nd birthday not that long ago of an Aboriginal senior woman, and it is quite the thing to attend that and see family and culture and how that is giving hope to the next generation of Aboriginal people in our community. So I always do turn my mind to that when I think about how do we garner the evidence and how do we put together the best practice programs to deliver care and support to communities as a way of preventing entry into tertiary hospitals and other healthcare settings. I travel a lot into remote parts of South Australia as well, and want you to know that the changes in provision of healthcare, I'm thinking particularly ENT and children and grommets and a whole range of things that are done for children that have come out of research, out of projects, is noted and it's seen in remote communities particularly, and it is absolutely changing the lives of children and young people in remote and far regional South Australia. Also, hospital admission prevention of people living with complex disability, complex medical conditions, and ageing with all of those things together is one of, I think, our biggest challenges, knowing that we know what is coming to us is an exponential, almost parabolic curve of seniors. You know, when the Premier asked me to do the sort of paired off ministerial role of seniors and ageing well out of health, I'm like, yeah, sure, you know, back a horse called self-interest, right? Because I'm the other side of 50 and heading towards the next decade. And I think when you've got a bit of self-interest in the game, sometimes it can help a little bit. But to bring all those things together, working in disability, working in intensive care and health, and Prof Burston, you're an inspiration to me in terms of the evidence-based work that I watched you do through the intensive care unit here at Flinders, and the differences that we're able to make for people in terms of changing that the way we delivered intensive care is extraordinary, and we can do that with a whole range of people. And in fact, we just kind of had a little caucus out there with some friends talking about how we could do some work with people with intellectual disability in the community to better inform their healthcare and their self-care and their vision for what is a good life. So your projects are noticed. The partnerships are really important. I think from the input of the hospital research group that I understand it's about $500,000 for this particular grant program, and that sort of brings you up to somewhere around the $2 million mark, which is fantastic. And we as government, and then we as healthcare providers can't do that without those partnerships. So thank you very much. And I guess I've got two things left to say, and probably it's back to front. You know, Chris isn't here. You've got the better version. That's me. No problem. You're welcome. No, Chris is amazing. But also, you know, we've had a few things going on this week. It's been a little bit busy, and no, I'm not the treasurer because I should barely hold a credit card. But anyway, good job, everyone. Thank you very much, and what a pleasure to be here back where my roots were laid in some sort of healthcare world a while back that I almost forget about, but don't want to. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks so much, Minister Cook. I won't reflect now on some of the old days, but maybe later. Look, it's my pleasure to ask Dominic how Dom's has been organising the grants whole process. He changed roles about 18 months ago. I'm not sure it was his favourite move in our office, but as things were changing, we realised we needed a grants officer to help manage this, and Dom has done a phenomenal job on this, both with this program, but also trying to find funding for other for people who are unsuccessful. And you'll hear it's been a really tough grant round this time. So he's continuously doing that, looking at the relationships with our partners, particularly Flinders University. And I think, Dom, really, I don't know what we're going to do without you, but so you better come up here and talk about it, and look forward to you hearing from you and hearing what's going to happen next.
Thanks, Andrew. So yeah, I'm really lucky to have the job of a Research Grants and Project Officer here at SALHN, and we're very proud to announce that we do have $500,000 of funding from the Hospital Research Foundation Group. Jim and Kelly, you guys are absolutely fantastic. You give us the money, which is extremely important, obviously, but you also give us guidance, advice and support, which is also really appreciated, and it just wouldn't be possible without you, so thank you. So these are the aims of our grant round. So we want to support research that benefits our community. The funding for research is obviously given to the Hospital Research Foundation. It comes from the community and it should benefit the community. In addition to that, we want to make our organisation a destination of choice for high-performing clinicians interested in conducting research, improvement or implementation. And I think what I'll show you in a few slides' time will demonstrate that we're on our way towards doing that. We also want to provide career pathways for our staff. A lot of our grant winners have gone on to do masters, PhDs or other degrees, and it's great to see, and we want to continue that. And what Andrew's big on is fostering the culture of inquiry throughout the entire SALHN organisation, which is really important. Everyone in this organisation should have the opportunity to do research if they want to do research. So this year was a particularly hard year. We had a record number of applications. We have 55 applications, which is more than what we've had in any other year. And they were asking for about $3 million of funding. And obviously we had $500,000, which was great, but what it means is there are going to be a lot of applications that are unsuccessful. We went through a process that narrowed down those 55 to 10 successful applications, and we split it into two streams. So we had an innovation stream for up to $25,000, and then we had a research grant stream for up to $80,000. And then, yeah, the overall success rate is 18%. For reference, that's about the same success rate as an NHMRC grant. So these are among the most competitive grants going around. And I listened quite intently to Ginny's presentation earlier and saying no to people. I feel where you're coming from. It's a really, really difficult job. It was made easier by our assessors, much like the editors and the reviewers that Ginny has. Running a grant round is not possible without high quality assessors. Our assessors among our most senior research staff in this organisation. I sent out 25 emails asking for people to assess the grants. I offered them nothing in return, and 25 people said yes. That's just unbelievable altruism that's available in our organisation. And outside as well, I'd like to acknowledge the Flinders University staff who also reviewed the grants, the Hospital Research Foundation Group staff. And this year we were so proud that we actually had consumer assessors for the first time on our grant panel. So every single grant was reviewed by a consumer. So if your consumer engagement wasn't up to snuff, you probably weren't successful. And with that, I will hand back to Professor Andrew Burston to announce the successful applicants.
Thanks, Dom. So, yeah, phenomenal amount of work and really well coordinated. So thank you from all of us. Okay, I guess it's go time. So look, our first award goes to David Cooper, as a senior physiotherapist in our rehab aged care palliative care division, on a grant called Lonely Steps, which is about uncovering the impact of social isolation on falls risk amongst community dwelling older patients. It's looking at a clinician view of isolation, trying to look at priorities and interventions with that. So it's a unique piece of work, and congratulations, David. The next grant is to Dr. Catherine Martinello from the neonatal unit. She's a senior neonatal consultant and research fellow in neonatology at Flinders University. This grant is looking at magnetic resonance spectroscopy. So this is a technique where you actually analyse the signal and you can start to look at energy signals locally. And this is looking at energy signals within the brain to try to prognosticate newborns with hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. So this is a terrible problem. It affects about 1 to 3 infants in every 1,000 born infants. But about 20% of these babies die. About 40% of these babies have lifelong challenges. And this is to try to develop a cut point so that we can get better prognostication for the whole, really for the whole of the country. So congratulations, Catherine. I want to note this was, I think this was particularly high scoring grant. So, you know, it's well done, well done. Our next grant was for Nicola Dean, well known to many people as the head of plastic surgery. Nicola can't be here, so I think Hester Lacey, Dr. Hester Lacey, who's associated with this program, is going to receive this along with Laura Soden, who's a research assistant. It's about health outcomes of gender-affirming surgery, and I think it's particularly important because they're going to look at baseline and the changes that occur with this. This group, I guess led by Nicola, really understands patient-reported measures better than anybody else really in the organisation. They're really almost world leaders in that. They're going to use that methodology as well, so congratulations, team. The next grant is Josh Inglis, who's a consultant physician and clinical pharmacologist at SALHN, and I think he's got a number of different roles, but this is around medication management. So around 10% of patients are harmed by their medication, and so de-escalation, changing medication, particularly occurs at times of transition of care, is an important piece of work. But what tends to happen is if you're discharged from hospital at those times, many things are happening there, and our consumers don't really know why it's happened, what's happened. They just know that they've got a different script. So this is actually looking at using some focus groups at these transition groups to try to co-design a communication tool so people better understand what's happening at this important moment. So congratulations, Josh.
Slightly away from it. There you go. Okay. Lovely.
That's great. The next grant is for Spencer Davis, who's an exercise physiologist in the day rehab service, and this is about looking at developing and implementing a sarcopenia response team. So sarcopenia is a condition characterised by degenerative loss of muscle mass, strength and function, and tends to occur in people with disuse, or particularly as people age. And so the aim of this project is sarcopenia response team is a rather novel piece of work with exercise physiology dietitians to develop a package of informed best practice evidence and consumer input into this project. So congratulations. Great. these are the research grants now coming up. So the first research grant I'm going to announce, I'll just make a couple of points about this and another one. This is the second time this grant was submitted, and so it's a competitive round, but doesn't mean that no is no. Okay, sometimes you have to come back, sometimes you have to, we've all had it. You read some comments, everybody who puts these in gets commentary back pretty quickly. Dom organises that. It's very important. You respond to that commentary, you improve what you've done. And so Yogesh Sharma, Associate Professor Yogesh Sharma, is one of our general physicians here, was awarded this grant for the impact of vitamin C supplementation in hospitalised patients with community-acquired pneumonia. It's a randomised controlled trial. So we know that this particular group have rather poor outcomes. There's a whole lot of basic work done. Some of them also have vitamin C deficiency. It's whether even but higher levels of vitamin C, the form of vitamin C is important. So they went through a systematic review. So that's the next process. You go from an idea, systematic review, and here we are at a clinical trial. So congratulations, Yogesh. And thank you. Next research award is to Dr. Tara Crawford, and she's a neonatal clinical trials research and data coordinator. And I think, again, I think we can understand this. About a third of children born prematurely before 32 weeks of gestation have language delays. And that's important because it affects so many things in the way they develop as people, the relationships, what happens within their family, their trajectory in life, and so forth. So this is looking at a parent-driven intervention. So this is really, consumer. We talked about the consumer component of this, how important that is. So congratulations, Tara, for this. Thank you. Very good. Our next grant is to Dr. Landau Chen, who's a nurse unit manager in Tobruk ward. We heard from Landau earlier this week as well with some great work on stroke recovery. However, patients who have stroke are routinely only seen once after leaving hospital, and many of those patients, they feel it's unusual. It doesn't seem right. So this is a project that's going to test a new nurse-led stroke clinic, support patients with stroke and with their families after hospital discharge. So I think you can see real utility in this. It's a bit hard to understand why that's not routine care, but that is what we have in front of us. So congratulations, Dr. Chen. Great work. I mentioned that sometimes you have to be persistent. So Laura Brooke, I think this is the third time, Laura, that this study's gone in. But great stuff. So this is on clopidogrel, which is a common, very common antiplatelet agent that we use in peripheral vascular disease, all sorts of things. The study's called CLOGENE. If I understand correctly, these drugs, and I think aspirin's not dissimilar, it's more old-fashioned, but it's not, you know, we vary as people and the drug efficacy varies, and some of this varies around a thing called CYP2C19 status, which is an enzyme that's important. About a third of patients who get on clopidogrel don't get effective antiplatelet effect. If you could predict that, then maybe we would see the patients and choose an alternative agent that was effective. Those patients may have much better outcomes. So this is the heterogeneity that we've been talking about a little bit. We talked about it with latent class analysis before. The heterogeneity of treatments are now where we're going. This is personalised care, in fact. So congratulations on this work. Our final grant, and it's not the least by any means, Erin Simons, who received this, is the project lead, can't be here. She and most of the team, I think, are at a conference today. It started today in Melbourne, so they've been here the rest of the week. It's about prioritising colonoscopy amongst individuals with rectal bleeding. The consumer on the team, Dr. Renee Smith, is going to receive the award. I don't feel... Renee's not here? Okay, so that will be in absence. Renee was going to receive this award. I think I'll summarise this, but... Sorry? Well, just... Yeah, well, we could do. It's... Only to say it's particularly important because Renee is a patient that this is targeting, and that we could have done a better job with, I think, would be fair to say. And so it's particularly pertinent. I think she was comfortable with that and maybe a bit more information. But I think that it's a great project, it's an important project, and one that will make a difference. So in everybody's absence, congratulations. So thank you very much, Minister. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, no, we'll put it in the post, that's right. That's the end of our week. We're already lining up for next year. We've got some ideas, but please let us know what you think worked and didn't work. I think we're getting better each time, but we're up to continuous improvement in this project as well. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks very much. Group photo.
Yes, nearly messed up.
Oh, God.